Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Tanwa Arpornthip. I am the blockchain technical advisor at SCB10X. And with me, I have Vipul, the CEO and co-founder of Together, which is very exciting because even though it's a redefined summit, but Together provide an intersection of AI and cryptocurrency, which is so cool, right? So Vipul, why don't we start with this? Can you introduce yourself and introduce Together as well as the Together's vision and goal? Like, what are you trying to do? What problems are you trying to solve?
Thank you. Excited to be here. I'm Vipul Ved Prakash, co-founder and CEO of Together. So Together's mission is to make AI more open and decentralized. We think that foundation models are one of the most consequential technologies of our time, and it is important that there is a thriving open source ecosystem around them. We really kind of occupy ourselves with two ideas. One is how do we create frontier state-of-the-art AI models that are fully open source, and how do we reduce the costs associated with building and using these models, and we do that in a large part by using decentralized computing.
Mm-hmm. So I want you to expand on that a little bit. What do you mean by decentralized computing? And when we talk about computing in AI, usually people would think about centralized service provider, AWS, Microsoft Azure, GCP. Like, how is decentralized computing competing with the centralized service provider? Like, where are the edges there? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah, so I think that AI is going to be one of the sort of much in the same way as blockchains, where AI is going to be a sort of compute disaggregation event from away from hyperscalers. AI workloads are stateless. They are pretty different. They don't need all the accoutrements of software like databases and file systems and object stores. They really the data is compressed as model weights, and so they're really very like pure compute workloads that can sort of migrate to wherever compute lives. And I think that it kind of resembles crypto mining in that way. In fact, GPU crypto mining farms are sort of the biggest participants in our compute fabric. And there's a set of technologies that Together has developed, and our co-founders who have been researching this for years have developed around compressing the communications between nodes that are training a model. And we've achieved over 100 times compression, which really sort of allows us to use disparate networks to participate in computing. And I think if you look at how the crypto mining sort of ecosystem developed, most of that work moved out of hyperscalers, and people have been able to build more efficient, more sort of task-specific, and more productive compute sort of networks for mining. And I think that's similar, I believe, in AI, where you can be very specific to AI workloads and design for that.
Mm-hmm. So in parallel with, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think it's also sort of an important part of an open ecosystem that you don't have lock-ins into, specific platforms and specific clouds. We are sort of not averse to using hyperscalers as part of our fabric, but we think you can really kind of reduce the cost of AI by applying decentralized principles.
Mm-hmm. In addition to disaggregating this like computing power from all the cloud providers, right, and just distribute it out into like a wider network. In blockchain, when we do that, another thing that we gain also is the resiliency of the network, right? Instead of having all the miners in one service provider, now you have miners distributed everywhere globally.
Right.
Is that also the case with distributed computing for AI? Like, does that improve the resiliency of the whole network in general?
Yes, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'll see less sort of like timeouts on the open source version of ChatGPT because it's distributed across networks, and some of the sort of kind of distributed computing ideas apply here, where if there is a large part of the network goes away, you can easily move traffic to other parts of the network.
Mm-hmm. And since AI is projected to be a very important part of modern workload in the future, I think having a very resilient back end for AI usage is going to be a huge shift in how we operate in the future. And of course, one of the things that you have been talking about is the open source ethos of developing AI model. Recently, Together released Red Pajama, which is an AI model with really cute name. And I have tried it out. And for all the audience out there, you can try it out and it runs on your phone. That's how crazy it is. It's like it runs on your phone, offline, no internet connection, and it performed really well. Can you share with us a little bit about Together's plan for open sourcing the model about Red Pajama and the potential impact of open source model on the AI community?
Yeah, this was just kind of a little bit of history on this. There was a paper a year ago called Chinchilla that showed that larger models were undertrained, and you can train a model for longer, and you will get the same sort of quality from a smaller model than you would by training it longer. And then it's only been about 2 months when Meta released Llama, which sort of took this idea further and trained it for even longer, over 1 trillion tokens, and found that smaller models can really kind of start to achieve the accuracy of bigger ones. And we thought this was a perfect target for a high quality open source model, and we decided to build this in a fairly sort of radically transparent way, where we recreated the data set of over 1 trillion tokens and published that data set in the open. And in addition to the models that we've built, there's at least 50 other models that have been built on this data set already, and folks are building other things. And projects like the one where from the MLC community that got Red Pajama to run on the phone. In some ways, they sort of happened with very little, collaboration with us, and has now created this way of running, fairly good, high quality LLM on phones and web browsers. So I think it sort of shows the potential of open source, that you can have tens of thousands of brilliant minds around the world participate in a movement, and has really speeded up the process of discovery around LLMs and AI.
Mm-hmm. I want to re-emphasize this again. This is like a very high performing model that you can run offline on your phone. That is mind blowing to me. So of course, with all this like open source development, I'm sure you have been asked this question before. With all this open source development, if you compare it to the closed source version, except for in addition to the transparency they did at first, what other advantages do open source models have over the closed source version?
I think open source really sort of drives the field forward. That's if you look at the impact of Llama and Red Pajama and other things, like it's kind of spawned all these projects like Alpaca, which is a way of distilling knowledge from larger models into smaller ones. There is the Doremi and Sophia projects from our research team that reduced the cost of building a model by 4 times. There's a QLoRa project that came out yesterday from Tim Detmers that lets you fine tune a model on your like a gaming GPU, a large model on a gaming GPU on your own data. and there's a whole number of others. So I think open source really sort of moves the field forward and helps us understand, which is, a fairly opaque technology, even when it's open source. I also think it's, AI is going to become so central to, as you were saying, talking about resiliency, it's going to become so central to so many of our applications, and business processes and society, that it is important to have, to have sort of decentralized control, where people can have, own their weights, and not have to depend on a third party for some of the most sort of like crucial work that happens. And I think open source is important for that. It's also, the other aspect is privacy. Here we are sending, we've seen reports of companies that are blocking access to, OpenAI servers because, even without realizing, people are pasting very confidential information for summarization and other things into chatbots. So having sort of control of, having the option to run this and deploy this technology in, a privacy sensitive way is super important, and open source really lets you do that. With closed source business models are built around protecting the weights, and that means hosting them in the cloud in a centralized manner, and makes privacy really difficult.
I like the phrase, as you said, own your weights. That I see that as a parallel of own your data, because we let like social media happen without any control, and then users being able to have control over the privacy of their data had become a really important issue. And since we didn't start by taking into account the ability for users to own their own data, now we just kind of have to like backpedal and have all these like accept all the cookies on all the websites that we get into. So I think for AI, I totally agree with you. It is very important to start thinking about owning our own weights, model weights, from the very start, and that would necessitate the existence of open source model.
Right.
Another aspect for open source model then would be the AI alignment and AI safety, right? Of course, for closed source model, it's really easy for the model developer to say, hey, some subjects are off topic. Like my model will never output anything that has anything to do with sensitive topics or censored topics, right? For open source model, that is impossible to do, because once you release the weight, people can fine tune on that weight and just run wild with it. So what's your thought on that? Like what are some of the implications and concerns when it comes to AI alignment and safety for open source model?
Yeah, I mean, I think open source is significantly better for alignment and safety. You can look into the weights, you can understand the activations, you can really sort of inspect the entire stack. Whereas with closed models, you are, sort of relying on the word of a company. I mean, it may be very sort of well-intentioned, but it has a particular perspective and has, a fairly relatively small number of researchers who are doing this sort of alignment research. I think there's a lot that we don't understand about sort of what lurks in the latent space of these models. And I also think to some extent, I think safety is super important, but to some extent, the fears about sort of extinction risks and all that have been really sort of overdone. I think the way it's manifesting, I feel is not entirely sincere, in that it's a narrative that's being pushed by companies that have closed models, and the response that is being elicited from regulation is to close them further. So there are definitely competitive and business model issues that have gotten intertwined with the safety narrative, which I think are important to, it kind of requires sober analysis. I think there are issues of like bias that are fairly serious safety issues that can sort of, disrupt somebody's life. And I think you can actually study those safety issues much better if you have the data that the model was built on, and you can study and analyze that data and its effects on the kind of model predictions. So I think it's something that's something that we need to learn about, and the more study there is from larger groups of people, the more we learn about it.
Mm-hmm. I see this as a parallel to what was said yesterday by Labs, right? They were saying in crypto, in blockchain, one of the things that people talk about all the time is also the social element of development. So what you just said is the difference when he was saying it's a difference between won't do bad things and can't do bad things, right? By relying on closed source models, you are relying on the company to not do bad things, right? You basically trust them not to do bad things. Because of course, a closed source model can choose to censor content without telling you, right? Right now, most of the models will tell you, hey, as an AI model, I'm not comfortable talking about that. But you can see an alternative path when the AI model wouldn't even tell you that you are being censored. And I see that as, you're trusting the model not to do it. With an open source model cannot do bad things because you know exactly what the model is doing all the time. And I see that as a parallel between blockchain, social security concern, exactly, and AI open source social security concern. That's great.
Right. Yeah, and you see these. We developed in collaboration with Stanford this benchmark called Helm that combines some sort of very well-known benchmarks and adds new ones, and you see that the open source models that are being created tend to score themselves on these benchmarks. So these benchmarks really, like, they're open community benchmarks that really they are shaping in many ways the development of open source models, and are this kind of social tool that you're talking about formalized. So you're not really, I don't think we are seeing crazy runaway like AI being developed in open source. If anything, you're kind of seeing the opposite, where open models are really sort of measuring themselves on how well they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Great. So for open source models to be able to compete head to head with closed source alternatives, like what are the factors that will make open source models successful?
I think one factor is that kind of like open source software, models build on top of each other. You can start with a base model and improve it continually, and you definitely see this with various fine-tuned versions of a model that exists. The cost of bringing down the cost of these models is important. Frontier models are still expensive, potentially costing, $50 to $100 million to build once you know the right recipe. And I think there would be participation from corporations, from public infrastructure. In fact, we built the Red Pajama models on compute provided by Oak Ridge National Labs on their Summit supercomputer, and you're sort of seeing interest from science and policy in having open versions of these models that can be used and studied. So it requires collaboration. It requires collaboration of time and infrastructure. But I feel the kind of the derivative of open source AI is really high, and things are moving very, very quickly, as we were talking about earlier.
Mhm. Great. So a lot of collaboration is needed. Another interesting thing about Together, to me anyway, as a crypto native person, is the incorporation of crypto tokens into Together's infrastructure. Why did you think to have basically a crypto infrastructure for payment within Together ecosystem? And how does that help align the incentives between different participants in your ecosystem?
Today we actually use stable coins or fiat to provide payments to compute providers. We've sort of designed it for a future where there may be tokens. I think part of the value of using the blockchain infrastructure is that we can have fast participation from a large number of providers around the world. Our first versions are fairly concentrated in larger crypto mining data centers. And as the the software protocol and network evolves, we really want to be able to open this up in a trustless manner to anyone who wants to participate in the network. And I think that's another way to sort of get really large amount of scale on model builds and inference eventually, is having an infrastructure closer to blockchains where commodity hardware can participate in the build process.
Mm-hmm. I love that, because of course one of the things that Web3 and DeFi are strong at is the ability to get people to collaborate on something, right? And coordinate the attempt or the effort to do something together, because that's what all the blockchain, DeFi, and Web3 is all about. So with that being said, that's like a really good intersection between blockchain and AI. What are some other areas of intersections that you think are underexplored and might be interesting for people to look into when it comes to the intersection of AI and blockchain?
I think some of the sort of learning on private data is pretty interesting. There's federated learning techniques. I don't think they have been quite explored in the sort of both, in the foundation model parlance so much. And that is it's sort of an ideal problem that you can solve with blockchains. I think data collectives are going to be interesting. A lot of the accuracy of these models we see are like the biggest factor is the data that goes to train them. And there are questions of data ownership, incentives for people to participate in creation of that data. I think that's a very interesting problem to kind of look at for projects. And similar to that, I think there are this set of like libraries now and methods and recipes that people are creating for how to use these models, in terms of agents and in terms of prompts, organization of that knowledge, marketplaces around that knowledge, I think are another interesting area that could intersect very well with Web3 style systems.
Mm-hmm. How do you see crypto playing a part in making the data collective happen, or maybe incentivize people to provide higher quality data for AI training?
Yeah, I mean, I feel there's there's really kind of two types of data. There is the base data sets, and then there's the instruct data that is really sort of teaching the models to use their latent knowledge and do specific tasks. Much of this data is created by people. I feel that's a really interesting area where my sort of one fantasy would be to have a network where people are creating instruct data in a sort of play to earn fashion. And these collections are then making the model better and better or more capable at certain types of tasks. I think the incentive system and, as I said, you can measure the sort of accuracy of these models. So you can imagine building incentive systems that reward the data that makes the models better. So there's a sort of, scope for sort of large scale collaboration and gamification of some of this, and it may actually scale, significantly better than current processes. It could be much more international, be much more diverse, incorporate viewpoints than you get from a centralized run process.
I hope there are some builders out there listening to this and get inspired to do it. Because of course, one thing that cryptocurrency, DeFi, and Web3 do really well is aligning incentives between stakeholders, right, in a very transparent manner. All right, Vipul, last question for you. I am really inspired. Listeners are really inspired. How do we get involved? Like if I have computing power to contribute to together, or I want to use computing power, like how do we get in touch with you? What are the best channels?
For right now, send us an email at compute@together.xyz. We'll be opening up more sort of public ways of doing this. But if you have compute and you want to sort of create, if you've been mining cryptocurrency in the past and want to mine AI, write to us at compute@together.xyz, and we can send you some pointers and ways to participate.
All right, Vipul, it's always a great pleasure talking to you. And for the listeners, we will move on to the next session. Thank you, Vipul. Thank you.